am I right in thinking you spoke to one or two operators on sort of conditioned anonymity?
Yeah.
And they gave you some quite juicy
Yeah,
insight.
I mean, they've basically said, and we've heard operators say things like this before, that, that Huawei is really important, that it's ahead in 5G, it's not something that's easily replaced.
Right. And they are ahead. It's generally accepted that they're ahead in 5G tech.
So I asked them this. I said, well, what do you mean they're ahead in 5G? Because surely with something that's standardised, it's 5G. Everybody, things we've just been talking about, interoperability. There's only a certain number of ways you can differentiate the product. Yeah. It's tweaks, it's energy efficiency, it's stuff like that.
Hello and welcome to another telecoms.com podcast. I'm joined as ever by Jamie and Ian, who and we had to retake this because Jamie kept messing around with the camera and stuff. And just to remind you that if you're listening to this on SoundCloud or on iTunes, you can watch it on YouTube or the site or Facebook and vice versa. This week we thought we'd break with recent tradition and go with something completely different. Only joking, we're going to talk about Huawei again. It's not our fault. Stuff keeps happening with Huawei, but actually this is especially Ian's fault because he's written some really good stuff about Huawei. Ian, you've got a garlic.
I'm just wondering why there's still garlic in here.
You do. There's some weird stuff they leave in it. Anyway, and apart from that, we're going to talk about 6G. Now we haven't spoken about that before. So there we go. No. And then we're going to round up by talking about smartphones and maybe some other fun stuff. But before I get into all of that, I should also flag up that next week we're going to do a special. We're only a week or so away from Mobile World Congress, so we're going to do a special preview. What can we expect from Mobile World Congress, apart from permanent liver damage, which is normally what we take from it. And we're going to get Paul from CC Group in, who's gone to about 1 million Mobile World Congresses.
Has he been on the podcast before?
He has, and he's going to be giving us the long view. And I guess we'll just offer some kind of preview of what we think everyone's going to be banging on about.
How many's he been to?
Mobile Congresses?
Right from the beginning?
Oh, since it was in someone's shed in Stevenage.
So I never went to it when it was in Cannes.
Right. Yeah. I think we're going back 20 years. We're talking a Ray level of longevity here.
He's older than he looks then.
Scale of 1 to Ray. He rode to his first Mobile Congress on a dinosaur, literally. So yes, we're going to do that. So make sure, and we're going to do it. We're going to shoot it on the Thursday. This is normally shot on a Friday. We're going to shoot it on Thursday so that Pierre can turn it around and we can get up on the site on the Friday, so you can listen to it on your flight to Barcelona. Lucky you. Think how prepared you'll be for Mobile World Congress as a result of that. We're just too kind to our audience, I think. Okay, so Huawei for a change. Now I'm going to almost straight away hand it over to you, Ian, because we're going to write about it because. I'm going to talk about it, because you've written at least a couple of things that I read this week that I thought were really good on the subject. And just the first sort of handover, we touched on it in the last podcast when we were talking about this O-RAN Alliance thing. Yeah. And I touched on it because I knew you were researching it, but you hadn't written it yet. You have written it, so why don't you tell us what that was all about?
Yes, I mean, we went over it last week, but so it's a fuller story than what I wrote last week, basically, which is the O-RAN Alliance stands for Open RAN Alliance, and it's basically a kind of operator-led effort to try and open up that bit of the network, the radio access network, and it's been quite hard to do that because of one of the interfaces in particular that gets used, which connects the kind of processing stuff to the radios
themselves.
So
it's like a sort of bus, as we would call it in PC parlance. And for some reason it's just closed.
It sort of gets implemented in closed ways. It's got a lot of complexity in it. From what I understand, it's called CPRI, which stands for Common Public Radio Interface, I think. And it's quite complicated. Bits of it aren't locked down, I think, it's almost like from what I understand, it's not a kind of finalised standard as such,
and that means it's not a standalone thing. So it's got to be integrated into something else.
So it is integrated. It tends to mean you have to work with one vendor's kit or at least one vendor's system. So kind of like smaller players, they would have approved, and it's made. Even though you can use your radio access network with, it's going to function with any phone or any transport network underneath. It's that bit of it. It's meant they can't sort of introduce radios from different suppliers into the network, for instance,
and it sort of raises the barrier to entry, presumably, and
exactly.
Thus the big kit vendors, they like it when the barrier to entry is raised.
It sounds a bit like technical, and why is this such a big issue?
Well, you're about to tell us, aren't you?
And the reason I think it's important is because the radio access network's like where all the money is spent. That's if you talk to people like Deutsche Telekom, they say about when you're building a mobile network, about 70% of the spending goes into your radio access network.
Wow.
You know, all the core stuff, which gets talked about a lot at the moment to do with Huawei because it's quite sensitive, is there's not a lot of money in that area.
Right.
It's all on the radio access
And is the
network.
reason the RAN so expensive because you've got to have just these
You've got thousands of sites.
base stations,
Yeah, you've got thousands of sites.
And
you've
you've
got
got to buy
truck
the kit
rolls
for
to
each
them,
one.
You've got to buy the kit for them. So any way they can try and get the costs down there is something that they're going to try and do. Any difference they can make. And see, some operators, Deutsche Telekom's been really kind of active in this area. I've talked to their former CTO a couple of times. He's now the guy who's sort of head of the tower bit, a guy called Bruno Jakob Furborn.
Oh yeah, that's one of those surnames that you've just got nailed.
Yeah. And he's like, when I met him at Mobile World Congress, I think last year or the year before, he was like, yeah, this Open RAN effort is really crucial because it's a good way of trying to introduce competition into that bit of the network.
Yep.
And if you can use things like white boxes, which are basically, it would be a kind of dumb box that uses your radio, and then you can, if you introduce virtualization, you can put software on that essentially. Then it means you can sort of reduce the costs quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about it is, to some extent, what, for example, PCs have been like forever.
Yeah.
Where you can pick your own motherboard, and your own graphics card, your own CPU, and your own RAM, and just piece it all together.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
whereas I suppose, just to extend the metaphor, and I'm putting it out here in case I've got it wrong, you could argue that the more closed RAN system is a bit more like the sort of Apple ecosystem,
yeah, I guess,
where where it's all just
everything's
built in. You can't cherry pick.
Yeah. And so that's why I think it's important, and it's obviously it's a bit of a challenge to the existing ecosystem. The RAN market has, and this is the other reason I think it's become an issue for operators recently, is that RAN market has three big suppliers internationally: Huawei, Ericsson, Nokia. There used to be more. There used to be people like Nortel involved, Alcatel-Lucent, Siemens before that merger took place. The Nokia Siemens merger. So there's used to be sort of 7 or 8, I think, at one time, kit vendors, and the fact that you've got less choice is obviously, less competition, and it means initiatives like this get looked at more seriously. I think they become a bigger priority for operators. But
was ZTE a significant player in RAN as well?
ZTE's a player in RAN. It's just,
and obviously they've been
Samsung
diminished
as well, but
by
they're
all
quite
the aggro.
small. They're quite small companies, I suppose, compared to the real giants of the Ericsson,
the big three,
the big three. And because it's so, it sounds like it's very disruptive. So it's obviously something that you feel is going to hit some resistance, and you hear mixed reports about. This is very much the kind of focus of the article is, how do companies like Ericsson, Nokia respond when something like this is going on?
How do they?
There's not been a sort of one model for all of them to follow, really. I mean, Nokia very notably has sort of got involved at quite an early stage in all of this. And if you talk to people who know a lot more about this than I do, like Gabriel Brown at Heavy Reading, he says that they, he kind of rejects the argument to some extent that all of this is a massive existential crisis and it's going to put these companies out of business, which is what the proponents who are trying to get in will tell you. The likes of Mavenir, which is a company that's it's a new entrant trying to get in there. Its message is very much they're not interested. The really big kit vendors are set to lose out.
Was it in that article that you featured an interview with Mavenir?
Mavenir features quite prominently in the thing I wrote in the last few days. And they've even suggested that people like Ericsson and Huawei have actually tried to block a lot of the developments that have been going on in the standards.
But then we have to take in this. I say
they've
nothing
obviously got
specifically about Mavenir, but obviously they've got this challenger disruptor agenda, so they're likely to say stuff like that.
And there was a really strong criticism they made of Ericsson where they said they specifically tried to block it in 3GPP, and as a result of that, we took
the
it
Open RAN thing.
Yeah, so there's. I don't want to go into all the technical complexities because it starts to get really
get bogged down.
And I'll get it wrong as well. But the kind of system that Mavenir favoured, the kind of version of Open RAN technology that it thought would create the best route into the market for kind of white box suppliers and make that much more feasible. They say that particular technology was that technology option was basically blocked by Ericsson in the 3GPP.
Which I find I don't obviously have any evidence one way or the other, but I find it completely plausible that any incumbent, when faced with disruption to their business model, is going to resist it.
Yeah, and Ericsson, when you go and ask, when I went and asked them that, they were, they didn't deny that it hadn't gone through the 3GPP and that it had been something that 3GPP didn't approve. They're not going to say, yeah, we did block it because we want to restrict competition. But clearly they were looking at this as something that, they didn't think was in the interests of either the market or their own business. So
have you come to a sort of strong conclusion one way or the other about the involvement of the big
well,
kit vendors
Ericsson is now involved. So this is the thing you have to note, is that they've actually signed up to the Open RAN Alliance. And as I say, if you talk to people like Gabriel at Heavy Reading, he says, Open RAN's quite a complex area. There are lots of things going on besides the CIPRI side of things, and some of the stuff that Ericsson wants to pursue is to do with that kind of stuff. It's to do with things like RAN automation.
Okay.
So there's another area is getting the RAN to communicate with core network systems.
Because there is the basic
interoperability there.
There is the basic philosophy behind open source in general.
Yeah.
Which is collective endeavour. Yeah, it's basically a sort of rising tide elevates all boats, or however that metaphor
this is less
goes.
open source as open approaches, I guess. Interoperability. There's still perhaps. It's the same, I suppose, with this technical standards that get approved. The things like the big ones that we talk about all the time, like 4G and 5G. They're not. There's probably some open source involved in there, but it's more about industry collaboration and ensuring there's interoperability between different systems. And with something like CIPRI, that's been obviously a bit of an obstacle. And you can see it being, something that the big kit vendors are going to lose out if they, if that really takes off. Then you talk to people like Mavenir, they're saying white boxes. Their forecasts are suggesting this could be 20 or 30% of the whole market in the next few years.
And I suppose Ericsson's joined, and while we find it perfectly plausible that it might have joined with a bit of a heavy heart, unless we have any concrete evidence to the contrary, we've got to kind of give it a benefit of doubt to some degree, do we?
Yeah, I think they
assume they're going to muck in.
I think the thing
not just
is
totally obstruct.
No, and I think this is why Nokia joined at quite an early stage, and I think Ericsson has obviously come under quite a lot of pressure from. You look at the people who are in the O-RAN Alliance on the service provider side, and it's AT&T, NTT Docomo, Deutsche Telekom, Verizon. It's all the big, really big tier one operators in all regions of the world. Now, if those companies are saying this is something we think is really important, and we want this from our kit vendors, then what are you going to do? You're going to sort of
you're not just going to stick your fingers in your ear and go,
stick your fingers,
like,
we're not interested, we're going to carry on doing things the way we've always done, or are you going to, you're going to have to give some leeway, and then I guess now they're looking at ways that it could be advantageous for them. And one way, Gabriel has said this a few times, that it could spur a lot of innovation. There are times when it might be in Ericsson's interest to work with a small radio developer to do something quite innovative that only addresses a small niche area. And in the past, perhaps they couldn't do that because it's not a big enough priority. They're focused on, the really big kind of macro opportunities. So if they can bring this kind of freedom into the market, then it sort of facilitates collaboration. It might open up some opportunities for them. But Huawei still hasn't joined. That's the one that's still very much on the outside.
So talking about Huawei, which obviously I trailed from the start, and talking about opportunities, you wrote another piece that I only just read today, but I think you published it yesterday, about some of the opportunities that may or may not be available to the other two kit vendors from all this aggro that Huawei's been getting. I only just skimmed that, so I'm not even going to try and paraphrase it. Why don't you just give us an overview of that piece?
Tying in with what's going on at the moment with the kind of security backlash and the concern in various European markets now. When we were talking about this a bit last week with Jamie's stuff about the European Commission sort of trying to introduce legislation that would stop Huawei from operating, and there's obviously a lot of concern on the operator side about the ramifications of that, because they've I think Huawei is probably the biggest service provider in Europe, biggest kit vendor in Europe.
Yeah, so you spoke to, am I right in thinking you spoke to one or two operators on sort of conditioned anonymity? Yeah. And they gave you some quite juicy insight.
They basically said, and we've heard operators say things like this before, that that Huawei is really important, that it's ahead in 5G, it's not something that's easily replaced.
Right. And they are ahead. It's generally accepted that they're ahead in 5G tech.
So I asked them this. I said, "Well, what do you mean they're ahead in 5G? Because surely with something that's standardised, it's 5G. Everybody, things we've just been talking about, interoperability. There's only a certain number of ways you can differentiate the product. It's tweaks, it's energy efficiency, it's stuff like that." And they were saying, but it's not just about that. It's about the stock. It's about their sort of things like their manpower, how much they can commit in terms of resources to getting jobs done.
So those are quite classic Huawei. I remember, I think Jamie wrote this up a Mobile Congress or two ago about People telling him that Huawei can just deliver more people to sort stuff out.
Yeah, so they were saying all these truck rolls that are needed to do work on, getting new 5G stuff up or modifying 4G or whatever, is something that they're already set up to do that in Europe. They already have these deals
ready
in
to
place.
rock.
If all of a sudden you get some legislation coming in which says you can't use Huawei anymore, then for Ericsson and Nokia to come in and suddenly be expected to take the slack, well, this service provider that I was talking to was saying they just can't replace them. There's no way they could do it.
Yeah.
And then I got in touch with our friend who always comes up on, the podcast, Bengt at North Stream.
Yeah.
Because I thought it'd be good to get
we might
some
even grab him
kind of analyst perspective.
Everything goes according to plan.
And he made the interesting point that, if you go back to last September or October when they were planning for what was going to happen in 2019, there's no way that they would have been prepared for any of this. I mean, it's really snowballed in the last few weeks, yeah? It seems to get more, more bizarre every day. So there's no way that Nokia and Ericsson would have prepared for having to do major swap outs and suddenly coming in. And therefore it's a really valid point, this resources issue. That, the other thing the operator that I was talking to said was...
sorry to butt in, is this swap outs at like 4G and like legacy technologies as well as 5G? Because most of the aggro
it depends
for
what
Huawei is at
happens.
5G, isn't it?
Most of the aggro is at 5G, but I suppose it depends what happens. But I think there's concern even coming in and having to be a sort of 5G vendor in replacement to Huawei. And the point, one of the points the operator made was that where Ericsson and Nokia are really sort of channeling their resources at the moment is into North America.
Right, both of them.
Well, the guy I spoke to specifically said Ericsson.
Right.
He said if you look at how many engineers Ericsson's got, I bet pretty much all of them are kind of focused on doing work in North America because they don't have any competition there from Huawei.
No.
And they've got big jobs with all the main
and they've got their mate over at Verizon.
And they've got Hans Vestberg over there kind of giving them work, and there's loads going on.
Yeah.
And that's sort of left Europe a bit. Europe's basically a Huawei kind of. I don't want to say a Huawei empire because obviously Ericsson and Nokia are there, but
you'd think
Huawei
so, being European countries.
Biggest
where's their loyalty
vendor? So I just thought it was a really interesting point.
No, I
noticed there's some LinkedIn action going on today in response to the story because Bengt sort of shared it.
And some people are piping up, are they?
Yeah, some people saying that they sort of deny that they wouldn't be able to come. I mean, they're Ericsson people, obviously, but their own press office got back to me with a statement basically saying that they made strategy changes in the last few weeks to enable them to, up resources and deal with this sort of issue.
Sounds like sort of UK Parliament going, we've just suddenly started preparing for no deal Brexit.
Yeah.
At risk of shoehorning Brexit into the discussion.
Yeah.
I mean, we know that both Nokia and Ericsson have been downsizing or streamlining or whatever euphemism we use for laying loads of people off.
Yeah.
So they're going to have less capacity to do stuff.
Yeah.
Whether or not they're channeling a disproportionate amount of it to North America, which again, I've got no reason to doubt your sources on that one. It stands to reason that they're not going to just suddenly be able to mobilise an army of engineers and system integrators and whatever other kinds of boffins need to implement these things, because then they're lean and mean. They haven't got this latent capacity just sitting around to do this stuff. So I suppose their press office can give you whatever kind of vaguely defensive response they want, but it seems perfectly plausible to me. I'll do one more thing. We haven't thrown anything Jamie's way yet. I'm feeling guilty. So I've got a segue. One more thing for Ian, but this is a segue to Jamie, which is you told me I haven't read this. You told me you just wrote a story about Huawei and, dare we say, it's 6G.
I did, yeah, because they'd had some more. They keep having these sessions in Shenzhen, it seems, with top people, whether it's the founder or one of the rotating
That's right.
CEOs.
And they got some UK hacks over.
Yeah, they had a few UK hacks, more kind of computer magazine type people.
It was a real mix, wasn't it?
I mean, there was someone there from the Telegraph, I noticed, but it tended to be mainly
Computer Weekly or whatever,
Weekly and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
so
fair enough.
So they got asked a bit more about the technical stuff than they usually do, and that obviously gave them an opportunity to then sort of go off on one about what comes next. And Eric Chu, who was the main guy sort of answering the questions, he's one of their rotating chairmen, I think.
Right. They like to rotate.
He was sort of saying the thing that kind of keeps him occupied at the moment and that's on his mind a lot is 6G.
Right.
they're now shifting R&D into 6G,
right?
Because 5G development is almost over. He said 2019, it's all kind of done.
Right, we know what it is.
And in the next few years, everybody's going to be talking about 6G, and that's where we're sort of starting to put our R&D.
Right.
And I thought it was quite interesting, given what's happening in the 5G market, that it's brought about this big crisis for Huawei. There's speculation that we might end up with some kind of, balkanized equipment market where you've got Huawei going back to, serving China, obviously, but
and
other friendly bits of
Middle
Asia
East,
and
Africa, wherever,
and then the the European vendors are obviously, they've got North America and maybe a lot of Europe. But maybe they're thinking in the future, if there is a kind of another turnaround, and things start to recover, that they want to be in a position then where they're able to lead global developments of the next technology trend, which is going to be 6G.
Yeah.
But then I noticed Jamie had been writing a lot about 6G this week as well, where he'd been a lot more thorough than I have and gone out.
Yeah, well, we'll get onto that in a second, but Pierre's been putting his hand up.
Then Jamie can explain, what the hell is 6G?
Well, we're leading up to that.
Well, no one really knows. But
Just one thing before I ask Jamie about what he's written, Ian, is one reason perhaps for Huawei to be prioritising 6G would be to have a bigger part of the standard with its own IP in it.
Exactly, yeah.
Now, what I don't know is how big a part of legacy standards, including 5G, Huawei's
I've
intellectual
been talking to a
property
few
and
people
patents
about that this week, and the general view is that, and also if you look at sort of data that I've been able to get hold of, that Huawei's position's improved a lot with the move to 5G.
Right.
So they have a bigger share of
and
the
they got
stack
some
than
momentum.
they had with.
Right.
You go back to the days of 3G. What they tried to do with 3G was to come up with their own technology, something called TD-SCDMA,
right,
which was like a Chinese developed standard.
TDS, how appropriate.
Basically didn't work.
Yeah.
And there was a little bit of that going on with 4G, where they had something called LTE-TDD.
Right.
What they've done with 5G is basically put all their efforts behind the kind of international standard, but basically trying to have a really strong
piece of the standard.
there. And I suspect that with, as you say, with 6G, there'll be even more determination to try and own that, given what's going on at the moment in the kind of trade dispute. And there's a lot of arbitration going on at the moment, obviously. Companies like Qualcomm are often involved in these sort of disputes where you get huge payouts happening. Someone I spoke to this morning was saying, if you look at China now, what they're doing is setting up their own sort of arbitration courts and trying to have that as an important jurisdiction for litigation in this area. But he also made the interesting point that a lot of the IP payments, the kind of licensing money that flows around the world at the moment from things like 4G, it's all smartphone based. It is very much depending on the money's
the intellectual property within the modem and that sort of thing.
Exactly. Well, it's really because that's where all the money is. If you look at the size of the smartphone market compared with the actual equipment market,
I suppose so.
That's where the money's coming from. Now with 5G and then presumably 6G as well, what you're going to see is that technology, that connectivity going outside smartphones and into other types of device, cars, potentially medical equipment.
IoT,
so all of a sudden, IP then becomes a big issue for all these other industries, and potentially a big sales opportunity. For advisory purposes, companies trying to get in and advise about, sort of patent assertion risks and that sort of thing. But also the money to be made from actually licensing equipment could be substantially more.
All right, so we'll. We've sort of answered the question that Jamie posed in his piece that he published at the start of this week, which is it too soon to start talking about 6G? It's something like that, wasn't it, Jamie?
No, well, yeah, but I mean, ultimately they've been talking about 6G for about 2 or 3 years now. So saying is it too early to start talking about 6G? I mean, it's two.
Oh no, you said, "Are you ready?" Didn't you?
Yeah.
You said, "Are you ready?"
2 or 3 years
said
after
the person who supposedly edited it.
After the conversation actually started. But it's
But not many people have been writing about 6G up until us suddenly getting all funny ideas.
Yeah, I mean,
we've doubled the amount of content there's ever been on 6G this week.
Yes, there we go.
But, I mean, it's just one of these things that it takes 7 or 8 years to develop a standard.
So of course people are talking about it already.
So they. They've been talking about it for a long time. It's been in the universities, and it's ultimately they need to figure out. But ultimately, there's going to be a lot of new science that goes into it. But there's no idea what the requirements for 6G will actually be.
So that's what I was going to ask you. You wrote quite a long piece. You chatted to a few people. Were you able to get some sense of what the characteristics or the nature of 6G will be?
Well, you don't know.
No.
Yeah.
You don't know.
You don't. I think
I
a
mean-
lot of it depends on what happens with 5G.
Right.
Because if you look at the Gs, like for what was 4G? 4G was basically sorting out the cock up that was 3G.
To do with data.
Yeah, I mean, 3G was supposed to be a big revolutionary technology
For
the
data.
very first for data. They
Yeah.
put data on smartphones for the first time, and then it didn't work very well. The devices weren't ready.
Yeah.
The connections weren't very good. It was all very disappointing. 3G, and 4G basically came along and did what 3G was supposed to do.
Did mobile
and,
data
and
properly.
if you talk to hacks like Ian Scales, they sort of say, well, it's not really 4G, is it? It's 3G. It's just it eventually got itself
3G on
sorted out.
steroids. Okay, fair enough.
And I guess 5G is supposed to be a bit different because it's supposed to be a bit of a transformation.
Yeah.
Are we
I mean,
going to get to the apex though with 5G?
Well, it depends what happens with it because there's so much that's still unknown with 5G. I mean, no one really knows whether release 16 is not here yet.
Yeah,
That's the bit,
and that's not here till the end of the
and that's
year
not
either.
It's end of the year, and then you won't see anything happening with it. A lot of talk to service providers; they're not really sure what the applications are going to be. The ones that get trotted out are always robotic surgery and
and all that.
cars, but there's a lot of skepticism about cars. And so no one really knows what it's going to do. And I think
Fair enough.
I think it depends. If it ends up being a bit of a disaster and not working for whatever reason, then maybe
there's
6G
more
ends up
fundamental
becoming
rethink.
a solution to that rather than something that's a bit more
Well,
radical.
so Jamie, it's totally fair enough that you weren't able to conclude something concrete.
Well, no one
about
can
6G.
conclude it.
What did you get from your research?
If I finish what I was
sorry.
starting to say earlier, basically no one knows what the use cases are going to be because everyone's talking about 5G, but it's we're not even at 5G 0.0 at the moment.
Yeah.
It's because of Release 16 will address total cost of ownership, softwareization, virtualization, millimeter wave. None of the standards that have been put out in the industry at the moment actually address any of these massive topics which are supposed to define the 5G era. So without these topics and without these standards, you can't actually figure out what 5G is. And the only reason 5G actually came across is because 4G networks were stressed and were strained and were put to the limit. But until you actually get to the limit of what 5G actually is, you can't start defining what 4G is.
Totally.
But I mean, what 6G is.
Yeah.
So ultimately, you got to say, well, what is the big use case for 5G, and then that will advance 6G. So it might be IoT, it might be, it might be in autonomous vehicles, it might be using different sort of coding, it might be using new science to improve spectrum efficiency, or it might be something as daft as using new technologies to get energy efficiency down, so you can actually. I mean, it doesn't have to be faster. This is what everyone's obsessed with. The next G doesn't have to be about speed.
No.
It doesn't have to be about latency. It doesn't have to be about bandwidth. It doesn't have to be about the pipe at all.
Right.
Each generation of mobile is for the benefit of the mobile industry.
Yeah.
But the mobile industry defines what that benefit actually is, and sometimes, when it gets to 6G, because there's so many small cells all over the place trying to actually, to run the connected community, they might turn around and go, wait a minute, our energy bills are through the roof. I know small cells are smaller than traditional 4G cells, but the collective
energy use.
the collective energy use might send it through,
and especially if they're putting edge computing equipment out there and stuff as well. So
I mean, this is the big thing. I mean, no one knows. I mean, edge computing, that could completely differ. I mean, when you talk about, something else I'm researching at the moment is what the next generation of smartphones are going to look like, and what a device will look like in a decade's time.
Right.
And
cool. Good thing we're going to talk about smartphones in a bit then.
Yeah. Well, I mean, none of the smartphone manufacturers actually want to tell them, and I think they're all being very cowardly, especially Huawei. You bottled it. But
did they not want to talk?
No, not in the slightest. But ultimately,
shamed them.
What a few people have told me, Ericsson have told me, is that processing power is ultimately going to be moving off the device.
Yeah.
And you just think of the intensity of the applications, the amount of the amount of data that will be required to actually run them effectively. You just can't. These devices just can't handle it.
And on the flip side, if you've got really fat, capacious pipes, then you can do this done client thing, client thing, where you're doing all the processing in the cloud because you've got the pipe to be able to handle the interchange.
But to do that, you need edge computing to take off. You need edge data centers. So that could completely redefine, and that could be the basis of 6G. The basis of 6G is edge computing and distributed computing power and storage power and self-learning algorithms held in the cloud and on these sort of mini data centers that are scattered all over the world.
I think it's likely to be something to do with that.
Yes.
There's a suggestion that it will cover some stuff to do with quantum computing, that might figure in. In 6G, because you need that kind of that is like a massive shift in terms of processing power.
We're getting closer
and
to Skynet
then it
now.
really would be transformational. That wouldn't be a kind of 4G fixing 3G type issue. It would be a real job.
But isn't it just moving the power consumption somewhere else?
Yeah.
Quantum computing.
No, not the power consumption, not power consumption, the processing power. So
but it's
quantum computing is a completely.
You're talking about energy bills going through the roof.
System, basically.
Yes, yeah.
So it's not 0 or 1; it can be both. It can
Right,
be different
I know about
states.
it.
And it massively changes the game in terms of processing power.
But what we're talking about processing power is taking it off the device, so you don't need to have a hot modem on there. You can actually store that into. I mean, one of the things I'm waiting to develop.
You mean CPU?
Yeah, you know what I mean. The
Right.
components themselves,
the chip. Yeah.
the size that this could be completely different.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to look like this in 10 years' time. When you take everything away from it, the battery can be smaller. If you've got voice interaction and gesture interaction, why do you actually need a screen? Then we've got two different devices. You've got one which is explicitly for entertainment, and the other one is for traditional communications and information. It's the form factor. God knows. Who would have thought?
I've got some cool utopian ideas about that, but I'll bring them up in a bit.
But who would have thought that this would be? You remember back in the early noughties when we were dealing with back when we were dealing with Nokia feature phones.
Quite.
I mean, Chris, can you imagine carrying something like this around?
Yeah.
Go back 15
was
years, you never would have thought about it.
Yeah, well, I remember
used to have all
writing.
of
I
that.
remember writing about the smartphones when they started up, and a typical early iPhone was so much smaller than this, a little sort of 3.5-inch screen. And then when I was at Strategy Analytics, there was this category we spoke about called phablets, which is a sort of portmanteau of phone and tablet.
Yeah.
And we considered phablet to start at about sort of 6 inches, and 6 inches is pretty normal smartphone. And I remember thinking, what kind of a dick would walk around with a tablet by the side of their head? If it looked like a real idiot, because obviously phones back in the day were this small. But now, culturally we've adjusted really quickly as well. No one thinks it looks. Not that hardly anyone
It's
actually
interesting.
talks on their phones anymore.
I wonder if they brought them in phablet sized in 2006, 7 or whatever.
People
when
just freaked
people
out.
have gone, hang on a minute, that's a bit big, isn't it?
But the thing is, everyone's trying to dictate the next form factor, and I just don't think it's taken off. Like,
what about these fold-out things that you've been looking at?
I think you just go back further. The next form factor of a communications device was what they tried to force on the market, and the market really didn't like, was a smartwatch. This was eventually they've got standalone connectivity, and they got sort of talking Bluetooth features and all that sort of thing. They got communications features on that device. So that was a potential different form factor for a communications device, but it just flopped. I mean, they're saying that something like
There's still sort of few.
There's sort of few, but I mean, not. It's never going to replace the phone, because this is too much of an entertainment device now, as opposed to a communications device. But I just think that I agree with you. Edge computing is probably what is going to define the next era, and I'm just waiting for instance, those. The exchange cabinets you've got at the end of every street. Where you got all the fibre wires and all that sort of thing.
Little data centers.
Yeah,
There'll be mini AI centres.
Just stick a server in there, and it's a little local data centre for anyone that walks past. And I think eventually that's going to happen across all of the world. Is all those little interchanges, inter-exchange. I can't remember what. Whatever the word is. Cabinet. All those little cabinets are going to house mini micro data centers.
Why not?
So what about like consoles? That's not going to be.
What do you mean?
Like a console is going to be gone. Then you'll be.
Well, I think you'll have it, but it'll be dumb.
You'll just have the controller, and then
I
the
see.
processing will be done in the cloud. So your TV will.
Well, it's kind of going that way anyway.
Yeah,
it is.
You can't. Effectively. I mean, you'd still have to have. I mean, I don't see why not. You could have. The data center the data center could have a stack which is just Xbox in there for the local community, and then all of a sudden, all you need to do is switch on your TV.
You hold like a USB key size.
It's already happening with these. I remember when you used to. I mean, maybe it's different for Android users, but you used to take photos on your iPhone, and after a while it ran out of space. You have to delete photos.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas now that they automatically go into
cloud
the cloud
storage.
you don't even choose it. That's the default.
Well, there's another bit of cloud processing that's actually been around for a while. When Siri first came out and these smart assistants, there's a degree of remote processing that goes on with that, because I think it's quite processor intensive.
Yeah.
That sort of speech recognition and the rudimentary AI that's in that stuff. So you've got that sort of thing already going on, and I suppose with all these other like smart speakers, this Alexa,
It would
all
take
that
too
jazz.
much space. Imagine every question wouldn't have to be pre-recorded.
Right. Yeah. Well,
Every
no.
answer.
Yeah, in terms of the data file.
Yeah.
But yes, just the processing. So yeah, I think Jamie's completely spot on in that way. It seems to be headed that way.
I mean, there's so many other things that you think that build on that argument as well. And when you look at AI, that is supposed to be everywhere and anywhere over the next couple of years, AI doesn't work with the latency that we've got at the moment. It's got to be so. When you look at machine to machine, it's got to be so snap instantaneous. So all of a sudden, you cannot have stuff going back to the core. And it has to be hosted on the edge. It has to be for machine to machine to work in the grand vision that we have. There has to be a distributed network, and the algorithms has to be hosted on the edge, and they have to be self-learning and self-adapting on the edge. This whole AI idea just doesn't work without a distributed cloud and edge computing.
Yeah. What was I going to say?
Someone who talks about this quite well actually is one of our colleagues, Aditya Kaul at
Yeah.
Practica.
Because AI is their thing, isn't it?
He was talking about this, with Ray on a video recently about the kind of battle that's going on between the centralized data centers and the companies that want to come in and start doing stuff at the edge, or even closer to the sort of device level.
Yeah.
There's a lot of vested
Like
interest
Jamie's
there,
cabinet.
obviously, because you've got the big kind of web guys have built up this centralized cloud infrastructure, and they have a sort of interest in trying to do as much of this there as possible. But as Jamie says, a lot of this stuff just isn't going to be, you're not going to be able to do that in a machine-to-machine world where you need this, super low latency.
Yeah.
So
Actually, I just
it's
remember
very
what I was going to say.
disruptive.
Network slicing. So we've been talking about how 6G, as with previous generations, we're only going to know what it is when we've been doing 5G for a while and we've got a sense of what the market's demanding of the next generation. And then one of the things that is supposedly built into 5G is this concept of network slicing, whereby
I think network
But you can
slicing is
slice on a
not as-
4G.
I don't think that's as interesting as everybody makes out.
well,
I think it's
let me quickly finish. I'm not saying it's
yeah,
intrinsically
we're going to leap
interesting.
on you, Scott. and
Yeah,
beat
well,
you
no,
up
please
before
do.
you are.
Please do. I don't mind being interrupted, but I would just want you to know what you're interrupting.
Yeah.
Which is that through network slicing, are we then not going to get a picture, and you can then look at data over how the network is being sliced at various points around the world, and then we can get a sense of, are most people dedicating the majority of their network all of a sudden to this, that, or the other, and might that influence how 6G is developed?
I mean, unless I'm getting the science completely wrong, I don't think network slicing is exclusive to 5G. I just think that it's something because in theory, network slicing is just splitting the signal and then creating virtualized networks as slices. So you can have, the pipe can be split into 10
I'm
pipes.
going to defer to
Is that-
Neil,
is that-
I'm going
is
to
that
defer
correct?
to Ian on this. He's
I-
more techie than I am.
Well, I don't know, but I know that when I went up to a demo that BT did at Wembley of one of the use cases for 5G, which was using it as a replacement for kind of broadcast systems.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of kind of satellite systems.
They've got their box at
yeah,
Wembley.
and in
haven't
that instance, it wasn't about latency. They said it was about network slicing, and that it was the stuff that's actually coming in future with release 16. I'm sure you can
Right.
do some of this with 4G actually, but there's sort of stuff built into those standards that allows you to do network
better.
slicing I guess just in a better way,
Yeah.
and it gives you some of the guarantees that you need for serving businesses, because they want that. This is what could play a big role actually in 4G. like dislodging 4G from enterprise environments. I think because
but
companies
isn't
want
that the reason that why it isn't as exciting? Because it's not necessarily a 5G revolution. It's
not.
The fact that standards and the science
it's
is
service level
catching up
agreements.
now.
I think. Yeah.
Yes.
So it's the science is actually. See, it just seems to be coincidentally the science and the standards are being released at the same time as 5G.
Yeah. It's kind of 5.9's reliability type stuff, I think.
Well, and that's an interesting thing about the development. Seeing as we're talking about the very early development of a standard, is you got a bit of a chicken and egg thing between the concepts and what is actually technically viable. So you can start planning to do something, but perhaps with the sure knowledge that you're not actually going to be able to physically do it for several years, even after everyone's agreed it's a great idea. So that's an interesting sort of trade-off that these boffins have to do.
Yeah. I mean, I can see. I mean, the thing is, I think that network slicing is less a revolution and more a realization. It's going to be like clouds. Like clouds was presented or I mean, another example will be blockchain. It's presented as a revolutionary idea at the moment, but sooner or later it's just going to become bog standard.
Yeah,
it's just something that you do, and I can't believe we ever. Like we look at cloud. You go, okay, it's something that we do, and I can't believe we actually managed to do without it before. I don't think it's so much. I think it's a revolution in that sense. Yeah. But it's just one of those things that it's just going to be like no one talks about cloud that much anymore, or that or
as
public or private clouds as
until
that interesting.
Until Google drops 10 zillion quid on it.
But I mean, in conferences, it's not that interesting a topic because people generally know how to do it,
isn't it?
Yeah.
It's
taken for granted, and I think
there's
that's
a lot of money going into it, but it's taken for granted that they will spend on it.
It's like you don't have conferences about electricity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I think that's what that is instead of what network slicing fits in. I think there'll be incremental, utilitized benefits and improvements over the years, but it's not going to be like AI where they have 5 years down the line they're going to have some revolutionary idea which builds on top of it and completely changes the entire fabric of society. But it is.
Okay. I've got I'm getting that clock gesture from Pierre. I got one last thing I wanted to throw into the smartphone mix. Well, we're talking about future smartphones, and we had this sort of thin client concept, which seems perfectly plausible to me. One of the things we're expecting to come up at this is Mobile Congress are the first sort of bendy screen type of implementations. But I've seen some sort of utopian stuff where you've actually got flexible PCB, printed circuit boards. So basically the entire phone is flexible. Now, if we have this thin client thing where you
and smoke it,
have a great big smartphone spliff. What would you sprinkle in? Anyway, yes, but the whole thing's completely flexible, and if not much of the processing needs to be done locally, because as we've said, we're getting this distributed processing going on, and we're having this bandwidth and low latency that enables us to offload nearly all of the processing onto some localized data center. Then presumably you could have a lot less sort of material in the phone, and if you've got these flexible PCBs that actually work, you could have these phones, or even it could be what revitalizes the smartwatch. Imagine if you had a smartwatch where you could just sort of unfurl a bit of extra phone from it and all that sort of thing. Now all this stuff is admittedly utopian, but it's not quite as far-fetched as you might think.
My problem with the smartphone is that it's just not functional. Like I think
smartwatch or smartphone?
Smartwatch. Sorry, it's just not functional because I get the idea that you can pull something out, but realistically, it's much easier to watch something like that than it is to watch something like that.
Yeah. And right now it's just a little 1-inch screen, which isn't much good for anything. But
I think you're gonna carry one of these around. But I think it's gonna be a dumb device. This is my grand prediction.
Okay, cool. We'll finish on that.
I think you carry one of these around, but it'll just be a really, really dumb device with very little processing intelligence actually on the device, because I think that will be all transferred to the edge eventually.
Yeah.
But I think this will be purely for entertainment purposes.
Okay.
And then as soon as you take all the processing power and you take the screen away, all of a sudden a communication device can be as something as simple as as
Little
a
Bluetooth
pair
headset.
of headphones, and you get a notification and it reads out your text, and then you dictate a reply
Because the
text
voice
to it,
UI is
and
up
then
to
it
scratch.
and then if you want to, and then they're embedding sort of connectivity stuff into Fabric nowadays, so you could have your controls for music there, and you can swipe back and forth because of gestures. If you need a bigger screen, biometrics are becoming absolutely fantastic. So you go to any universal screen and it recognises you immediately, and it
your own
pulls up.
special
It
experience.
brings up your homepage on any screen that you look at in the planet. Obviously that's way down the line, but I mean,
Cool.
A lot
if we
of
could
these,
talk about 6G, we can talk about that.
yeah. I mean, that's what I think. I think this will become redundant.
Cool.
I'm going for the smartphone spliff.
You're going for the
Might have trouble with latency after that. But
spliff phone. Cool. Well, on that note, I wonder if we'll get censored for that. Do you think that's allowed? Anyway, on that note, okay. So just to remind you one more time that a day or two earlier next week we're going to do our special Mobile Congress preview edition, and we will of course be recording something from the show like we always do, provided everyone can get it together. So yeah, keep your eye out for both of those, and thanks for listening, and make sure you join us for the next one.